Welcome to Effective Strategies for Community Preservation Projects, Building Support for Historic Preservation. My name is Nicole Flynn. I am the Field Services Representative for the New Hampshire Preservation Alliance. We would like to welcome you to our virtual gathering, part of our ongoing mission to assist people like you who are caring for historic community landmarks and historic buildings. These programs of the New Hampshire Preservation Alliance, the statewide membership-based historic preservation organization, are supported by these generous sponsors. We'll hope that you'll become a member if you're not already. Membership helps support our assistance to community projects like the ones that you are working on, advocate for preservation at the state and local level, and expand the preservation toolbox with things like tax incentives and property easements. Your support can make a big difference. This session is being recorded and will be available on our website under the resources tab on our webinars page and on our YouTube channel. We ask that you mute yourself and we will be offering opportunities for you to ask questions as we progress. We're going to talk about a few different major topics in getting started with your historic projects, historic preservation projects. Today, we are joined by Helen Frink, grant writer, board member, advocate for Chase's Mill project by the Mill Hollow Heritage Association in Alstead, as well as the Newington Railroad Depot project. And I apologize, the horse sheds in Ackworth, was that the last one?
That's right,
Yep.
Nicole, yes.
Yes. And also we have Maggie Steer, the Advancement Projects Coordinator here at the New Hampshire Preservation Alliance. And we hope to be joined by a few other preservation advocates, past board members and current board members, but I don't see them in the participants at this moment. So as we get started using the chat feature on Zoom, if you could put in your name, the town that you're in, and the project that you are advocating for or working on. And then as we proceed with this program, if you come up with a question that you would like to ask that's related to the topic we're talking about, you can put that in the chat feature. Or if you just come up with any question related to these topics, you can put them in there and hopefully we'll get to them. If not, we'll be saving the chat feature transcript and I'll look over those questions. And if I can't get to them during this program, we will definitely follow up with you after, okay? So we are going to, let me stop the share here so we can see everybody's faces. Maggie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I might know some of you. I was for 10 years the field service representative for the Preservation Alliance, and I am chair of the local Heritage Commission in Wolfboro. So I've coached a number of people on doing preservation and that three-legged stool of fundraising, project development, and communications. So I look forward to hearing your questions today and hopefully trying to guide you in the right direction.
Helen, would you like to introduce yourself?
Helen Frink, not a professionally trained preservationist, but got into it by necessity. First project was the horse sheds in Ackworth. Not everybody has a hearse. Not everybody has horse sheds, but we do, and they needed preserving. Spent 6 years on the board of Chase's Mill in Alstead, one of the few water-powered mills left in the state, and hoping to go to work on the railroad depot in Newington, my hometown.
Oh, thank you very much for that. So last month in December, we did our first session in this series to get started with historic preservation projects. We encourage you to use the Getting Started with Your Old Building guide that we have on our website. I'll also be sending that out as part of the follow-up email from today. But we're going to be focusing on a number of the parts of that document today, starting with practical planning aspects of the project. I'm going to ask the panelists to discuss organizational capacity needs first. So we all know that it's important to have the right team in place to make a project a success. Helen, how did you find the right people to get the Chase's Mill project started? I know it's been a long-term project, and you were not part of the original work on it, but you came in when you were working on this large capital campaign project, correct?
Yes, the group, the Mill Hollow Heritage Association, was founded in 2012. And when I joined in 2015, they had $11,000 in the bank and were considering hiring a professional grant writer. I was tempted to stand up in that first meeting and say, well, you can't just go around asking rich people for money. The project far outstripped the reserves on hand. So the board had never heard of LCHIP or the Preservation Alliance, but that was where we got started. The first group of people were neighbors. So if you're trying to preserve an old building, look for who lives around it. And likely they do not want it to collapse or fall into the cellar. And so those people can be your first allies. And they'll be divided into two types: the people who'd really like to see something happen there, and the rest of them who say, just tear it down. It's too far gone. Those people will always be in your ear. And my advice is not to spend too much time on the naysayers. Collect your allies, collect the people who want to help, not the people who are opposed or who think that it's impossible to do this. Sometimes when people ask you, well, once you get that building saved, what are you going to do with it? It's fine to air your own ideas and then to ask people, well, what do you think? And urge people to imagine, urge people to be creative about what they see that the building might become. So neighbors were our first allies. Another huge thing that happened to us was COVID. And that moved us into, couldn't open the mill for hands-on projects or in-person visits, and had to move to Zoom, which we're now all so proficient with, and started sort of virtual gatherings with things as simple as telling stories about the place. What do you remember about this building? And that connected neighbors with neighbors, former residents, people who were close at one time and had moved to Florida or California. And they began to network among each other, and those became some of our first supporters. So that was critical. I don't want to go on too long. I do have some thoughts a little bit later about keeping the team together and working together, but I'll turn it over to the next couple of panelists.
Maggie, do you have anything to add about, finding the right people to get a project off the ground?
I think it is critical to find the right people, and I think it's helpful to know what kinds of people you want. And as I said before, you want people who have expertise in building and old buildings. People who have already restored an old building would be a great candidate to talk to. You want somebody who understands communications and outreach and has a very positive attitude. You never want to let your messages deteriorate to the point of a big debate on Facebook or anything like that, but always to keep a group who is optimistic and positive and not going to get into any gray areas that have negativity to them. And then you want some people who really are skilled with finance and managing your money, doing the nitty-gritty of getting a nonprofit status, if that's what your group will need. That kind of more clerical work is really important. One person cannot do all this stuff. You need a group of folks. And I would say it's easier in a small town where everybody knows everybody. We all know that the busiest people are the ones who get the most done. And so Having a few very visible advocates from your town, people who are well known and well respected for getting things done, is always a plus.
Now,
Can I,
go ahead.
excuse me, I wanted to pick up on a few of the things that Maggie said. People who are well respected in town. So look for people, library trustees, conservation commission members, some people who have already done some service for the town. That can matter. If the people at the top, the selectmen, the tax collector, don't want to hear from you, start somewhere else. It's also really important to have people who can do things like build a website for you, manage constant contact. Sort of the technologically knowledgeable people are just as critical as the historic preservationists. And the team you start out with is not going to be the team that you end up with 5 years down the pike. So in the beginning, you do need people with a strong interest in a historic building and preservation skills. And then later on, you need people who can carry the project into the next stage. What are you going to do with this after you get it fixed? That's important. And just one other caveat. You start out very often with people who are passionate, have a real emotional attachment to a particular building and site, and that is very precious. On the other hand, you need, as Maggie said, to build out a broader board of people. A really strong leader can let everybody else take a back seat, and be careful that that doesn't happen. Draw people out. Build on the skills that people have, and be sure to keep everybody close, keep everybody networked.
Thank you. How do you handle meetings and stuff, getting started on these projects? How often do you think it's good to meet on these projects, and how much do you communicate with the public as well? Those are two issues.
Well, I'm going to jump in and say, and it varies a lot how much you communicate depending on where you are and what your needs are in your project. But I think at the outset, it is vitally important to have a clear mission and a clear case statement about what you're trying to perceive. Does everybody understand what a case statement is? Or do you want me to define that? Okay, I will define that then. A case statement is really, how are you going to make the case for support for what you're trying to do? And it can take quite a bit of work to get to the point where you have a good case statement that will resonate with a broad cross-section of your community. Even if you're not dealing with the naysayers that Helen mentioned, you are probably dealing with people that you ultimately want to ask for money. And you want to make sure that you have answered their questions in advance when you go to talk to them. So understanding what sort of shape the building is in and what it might cost to rehabilitate it, what you might want to do with the building, how that fills a community need or is of benefit to a number of people in your community. Who are the people who are involved with you? What's the status of your organization? Do you have capacity? Have you gotten your 501c3 status? Have people done things like this before? Are you going to be trustworthy with money? Who else is working with you on the project? Have you hired someone? Are you bringing in a group of volunteers to do the work? All those kinds of things should be spelled out in your case statement. And it can be a simple 8.5 by 11 couple of page statement. Or if you've got somebody who's really savvy with design, it can have photos, it can have graphs, charts, and be a lovely color piece that you can leave with people. But at the beginning, I would say start simple, do your homework, make sure you understand the basics of what you're trying to do, and then test it out and ask some closer friends, hey, would you just read this over? What kind of questions do you have? They might say, oh, you really need a map. Or, gee, have you polled the other nonprofits in town? Might they have a need for space? And then you need to go back and do your homework and do that so that you're really well positioned to launch your project.
Question that was posed is, if you have a board of selectmen or a town board of some kind that you need to get on your side, how do you approach them? Do you go and speak to them individually, or do you go and present something once you have a good case study or a case statement? Do you present that to the full body?
Well, I'll let Helen speak to this because she's worked with her town a lot, but the best piece of advice I ever got, and has really been of value, and I think it will be for you too, is your job is to make the selectmen look good.
Yeah.
They want to be perceived as being successful in accomplishing a lot during their terms in office.
I wouldn't start with the selectmen either, quite. I would get the word out to the townspeople first. So get some allies in the town. It depends a little bit. If you're working with a municipally owned building and you need permission or green light from the selectmen, that's a little bit different. The projects I worked on did not happen to be town owned. But the more you can let people know about what you plan to do in a less formal way, the better. I wouldn't go into the business of approaching the selectmen in any way that causes a vote or a definitive up and down until I was pretty ready for things. Town meeting, though, this is a really good time to be thinking about the lead up to town meeting. So in small towns, oftentimes there is a time at the end of the meeting or in between for people to kind of speak about what else is on the town's radar, what else is coming up. And it's maybe not time for you to get an article in the town warrant, but it might be a good occasion to have a few words at the end of the meeting, or create a handout for town meeting, that sort of one-page case statement, if you can, and distribute it there so that people know what you're thinking of doing. You want to own the story. You want to get ahead of the opposition in case that comes your way. And you also want to sympathize with the fact that everyone is going to tell you, we don't have enough money to do this, and this is there's never a good time for asking people for that kind of full-on support. But get out ahead of the story and get your case statement together and some allies in town, I would say, before you go to the selectmen, probably.
I don't think it's a bad thing to, if you're working with a municipally owned building, to have informal conversations to find out how the selectmen are feeling about what you'd like to do. Because sooner or later, you probably will need a town vote if you're asking for money or a warrant article. So,
go
ahead.
I had a little bit of other experience with this. So the horse sheds in Ackworth were owned by the church. At some point, the selectmen in 1954, in fact, forgot what the town pound and the horse sheds were for and who they belonged to, and sold that property to the church for $1 whole. And the church, of course, has several buildings in Ackworth and no capacity to repair. What we did was finally put an item in the town warrant. We needed a hearse house. So we have a horse-drawn hearse that belongs to the town, which cemetery trustees, of whom I am one, were responsible for. So we cooked up a deal whereby the town would rent a horse shed from the church. And what we did was put an article in the warrant asking for $5,000 for a 10-year lease on one of the horse sheds, conditional upon our getting an LCHIP grant. Made it clear to people, if we don't get an LCHIP grant, we don't need your $5,000. And people went for it. It's kind of a gamble. So if we succeed in doing this, will you give us some money? The other thing that you can do at town meeting is ask for sort of a vote of confidence or a very small sum of money, limited in some way, make it contingent on getting other support. anything that you can do to get your toe in the door without really forcing the issue so hard that you get a no. That can be a delicate way to proceed. Tiptoe in.
We had a question in the chat from Jane asking, how is a case statement different than a mission statement? Is that?
A mission statement for a single project effort might be the very first sentence of your case statement. The Friends of the Ackworth Town Hall, just making something up, Helen, maybe I should say Wolfboro. The Friends of the Wolfboro Town Hall want to work with the community to restore our precious 1888 building. That's the mission. The case statement then says the who, what, when, where, why. So a group has come together. We've done a building assessment. We've got an architect on board. We know it's going to cost this much money. Here are the benefits to the community. Here's what we'll lose if the building is torn down, you know, all that. So you do want to sort of address the alternatives. And here's why this particular scheme makes sense from a funding point of view. Oftentimes you'll see in municipal projects, particularly, that a public-private partnership in the fundraising piece is the best way to go. I've had experience where the selectmen will say, and this was the case with the Wolfboro Town Hall project, $4 million is too much money for us to ask taxpayers to contribute. So a Friends group was formed, and the Friends group said, we'll raise $1 million privately, because the selectmen were comfortable with the $3 million figure for the town to do. So it's going to vary from town to town, but that is a short definition.
I'd make one other suggestion, and that is read your town's master plan. It's very interesting that the master plan is kind of a broader sort of statement for the town. And every time that I've read a town master plan, there's something in there about the value of historic preservation, and good souls put that in without thinking of the money implications sometimes. But that is always worth quoting. So read your town's master plan and say what people have said the values are. The last time that Ackworth created a master plan, they sent around a town survey and asked people what about their values, and historic preservation came out very, very high. And it's useful to know that, but the master plan is useful. Another suggestion is the state Division of Historical Resources just put out a brand new 5-year plan, and that's worth a read. You can find it online, and it gives some good persuasive language about the value of historic preservation to the state of New Hampshire. So again, New Hampshire Division of Historical Resources, brand new 5-year plan. And I like that because it's up to date and it's forward looking. And so that's a place where you can find some good, strong language to quote and to help you gather that kind of support.
That's a really great addition there. Getting back to the team real quick, is there someone that was involved in your project that you didn't expect to be interested in it? Is there someone that you didn't think was interested in historic preservation who got involved that was helpful?
I've seen a huge contribution on a project I'm working on right now by a retired reporter who is a communications specialist and has really been helpful in strategizing about just the kinds of things we've been talking about. So you wouldn't necessarily think that that person who is a relative newcomer to town would care that much about preservation, but that has not been the case. And it's been a real asset to the group.
Yeah. We had some similar wonderful luck with a gentleman who retired to Alstead and was a database creator and developer and administrator, and not obviously interested in historic preservation to begin with, but turned out to do a huge amount of work in administering the databases of donors and people we communicate with. So that can be very important. And in this day and age, your supporters and your team members don't all have to live in the same town. So we have a fundraiser who lives in Brooklyn and a person in California who's a grandson of a former owner of Chase's Mill, who is the kind of genius who can get us a YouTube channel and a QR code. So not everybody needs to live where your building is, and people whose skills are applicable to the broader needs of communication, tracking, managing donations, those people can be terrific. And their skills may not look like historic preservation, but as team members, they can be really essential.
The other thing I would mention is photographers and videographers in this day and age, and Chase's Mill has done this very well, but in this day and age, your social media presence is great. And terrific photographs and really succinct to the point videos can make a huge difference in telling your story, and that's vital.
And keep your website alive. It's a real turnoff when people click on some link that fails to open or they get some sort of an error message. So get someone who can build you a website and add to it at regular intervals. And that's the place you post your newsletters, your annual report, the link to your Facebook page, and whatever can be updated quickly to show progress. That's really what people expect in this day and age. I'm not a technical person. I can't do that sort of thing, but I can persuade people who know how to do it to help us. And that's important.
And people like to be asked, for the most part, to use their skills to help a project. So don't be shy about that. A no is not the end of the world. It just means you're going to keep trying.
So that kind of leads us into the next topic that I wanted to focus on: fundraising and communication strategies. What are ways you found most effective for engaging your donors and your volunteers? We talked about websites, we talked about social media.
I'm going to jump in here because I think before you start engaging donors, you need to do a couple of really important things. And I know the Getting Started document, Nicole, that you recommended in the beginning, gives a lot more detail, but I'm just going to talk briefly about the importance of trying to get your building determined eligible for the state register, which opens the door to a lot of credibility. It will help you to understand the cost factors of what you're trying to do, and it will make you eligible for grant programs that have a fairly low threshold and will really help you get started. So state register is the most important starting step, and that's managed through the Division of Historical Resources. It's a state agency. The second thing is the Preservation Alliance has a grant program to get a building assessment done, and you have to be determined eligible for the state register to qualify. Again, it's not a lot of money. It's a matching grant on your part, but it also, by raising the money to match that, or perhaps asking the town, that's the foot in the door approach that Helen mentioned, you get the assistance of the Alliance, and you get a very well-crafted report on the present condition of the building, its historical significance, and the treatment options that are recommended to do a good, thorough preservation job according to the Secretary of the Interior standards. And that just sets you up. That builds your foundation. Another tool that can be really helpful is another Preservation Alliance program called 7 to Save.
Mhm.
And Helen's project, the Chases Mill, benefited from this. The Wolfboro Town Hall that I was closely involved in benefited from this. It's a great communications tool, but you have to be far enough along to really make a compelling case to be selected for this statewide listing of endangered or threatened properties. So those are 3 steps that I would say you really should take in the early stages of your project. The other thing I'll say is that these projects take time, and a 10-year project is about average in a small community. So don't expect you're going to do it all at once.
Yeah.
Give yourself time. I mean, it may take a year just to do the state register. It may take a year to do the assessment grant. It may, 7 to Save is a once-a-year thing. So you may decide you're going to apply in August. The announcement will be in October. You do a whole chunk of publicity, and then you get your fundraising going the following year. Does that make sense to you, Helen?
Yes, absolutely. And these pieces, the state register, the Preservation Alliance building assessment grant, and the 7 to Save, those are all questions that come up if you're applying to LCHIP. So these are absolutely the foundation you need. The Preservation Alliance's building assessment grants, my experience with that is they were fabulously detailed. They were absolutely the blueprint for how to go ahead. And the cost estimate, particularly for Chases Mill, was just staggering. But that was worked out for us in phases. So we start with phase 1, which is usually the foundation and the roof, and then go on from there. So as Maggie has said, you've got to envisage this as a pretty long-term project, and that it's not going to happen all at once. Rejoice in each stage you get to, and be aware that each of these accomplishments is the occasion for more publicity and more positive outreach to the people who support you.
Yeah.
Well said. Now, do you want us to talk about fundraising?
Well, I want to add a few things. So for the state register or the national register, you need to have the buy-in of the owner of the building. So they need to sign off on the listing. So that is one important part of that. And also you are able to apply or nominate a building to both of those. Both are not necessary, but it's not an either or situation. And these are honorary registers of a repository of historic information. So this is a way of creating an inventory of the historic resources that are in an area. So these do not have any regulatory thresholds that go with it. The regulatory protections for historic resources is not dependent on listing on these registers. So that's the piece about that. Then the second part is with the conditions assessment. One of the things that you should be thinking about is what the building is going to be used for, because that is going to affect the recommendations for the treatment. You can go and do a conditions assessment without knowing what the building is going to be used for, and that's considered a stabilization plan. So that's just making sure that no further deterioration happens to the building, and that can be a really useful tool to buy you some time if it is going to be a really long project or a really high threshold in getting that money to do a restoration or a rehabilitation project. Okay, so those things are really the basics that you need to have in place to go and then ask for help and to ask for money. We've mentioned.
So, since
LCHIP.
Helen's a grant writer,
Mm-hmm.
shall we let her talk about doing the grants, and then maybe I'll talk about private fundraising?
Sure.
Does that make sense?
I can plunge in, but let me ask first, Nicole, have you covered the whole LCHIP process with people or given some insight into that?
We touched on it in the previous session, and we will be doing a session later on in the year focusing on the LCHIP process. But briefly, this is a pool of money that is set aside for conservation of land and historic resources. And this is from real estate transactions. And it is administered by the LCHIP, a subset of the state government. It's the Land and Community Heritage Investment Program. So what that money is meant to do is to have a community benefit, an investment in the community so that people can have a better quality of life, a better sense of community, and to support those activities that make New Hampshire and our small towns great places to live. This money is available to nonprofits and towns. So if you are not a nonprofit, you can partner with a nonprofit, both for LCHIP and other funding sources. So you don't necessarily have to create a whole nonprofit. You can ask someone to partner with you for a project rather than creating that infrastructure that may not be necessary beyond the preservation project that you're working on.
Can I plunge in here with a couple of starter hints? Go, if you haven't already, go to the LCHIP website. It's just www.lchip.org. So the LCHIP website, go there and get yourself on their mailing list. So the regular email list, sign up for that. And in the spring, LCHIP offers workshops in applying for LCHIP grants. And you can go and keep your ears open, learn everything you can, size up the competition, get some insight into the process and how it works, even if you're not ready to go. You may be thinking, okay, first I see we've got to get the building assessment grant and we need to get nonprofit status and so forth. But still, you can go to the LCHIP information session and start learning your way into the business. That's important. Another thing that I think is incredibly useful, look how other people have done what you are trying to do. So the LCHIP website has a list by town of all the LCHIP grants that they've given. So has somebody else in your town gotten an LCHIP grant? Did the library get one? Or did some other historic building? Has your town hall or a church building been renovated with LCHIP money? Or in the neighboring town? So find out who got the money and what the project was like. Go to their website, see if you can talk to some people and get some very helpful insight. There may be people close by who have gone through the process and can be incredibly helpful. So get on the LCHIP mailing list, get yourself into the workshops that they'll offer early this year in historic preservation grants, and then take a look on their website about your town. Have other entities in your town or the next town over gotten LCHIP grants, and for what, and how did they work through the process? Those are all things you can do before you really plunge right into it.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, we have a field service program and our field services rep is Nicole, and her job is to keep you straightened out and taking the steps in the appropriate order. So if you live in New Hampshire and if you haven't yet talked to Nicole, I would encourage you to do that. It's incredibly helpful to just have someone at your side who can help you remember who all these agencies are, is what the alphabet soup is, give you referrals to other people to talk to, help you strategize about how to do these things.
I want to put in one other word about LCHIP. Remember that it's a matching grant. So you have to apply for half or preferably less than half of the money that you need. And you'll have a better handle on the amount that you need when you get your building assessment. LCHIP gives partial grants. So if you, when we applied, for example, for Chase's Mill, I think we asked for $200,000 or so and we got 100. And the director of LCHIP came for a visit and said very nicely, we only gave you part of what you asked for because we weren't sure what you could do. We were a new organization. And so this was a sort of give us a leg up and see if we could accomplish what we set out to do. So partial grants are possible. The other thing about LCHIP is because it's a half of what you need, I always tell people LCHIP opens wallets. people will help you come up with the matching funds because they don't want to leave that money that you've gotten pledged on the table. And that can be incredibly helpful. You don't need to have a match in hand to apply for LCHIP. You have 2 years to come up with the rest of the money. But at least go to the website, sign up for their email list, and get into their workshops about these grants to get started and figure it out. And again, see if anybody in your town has already gotten an LCHIP grant and can give you some help and advice.
If it's a municipal project, a town-owned building, the other program that is available is the Moose Plates program. This is the conservation license plate. $25 of your registration goes towards this if you choose to get a Moose Plate. Moose Plates has steadily been increasing year over year. More and more people want to have that little moose on their license plate to stand out as New Hampshire. And so that money is not matching funds. These are grants up to $10,000 that are available for municipally owned buildings. And these can even be applied for nonprofits that occupy municipally owned buildings. So if you have a historic society that is a nonprofit, but you're in a building that's owned by the town, that you're still eligible for these. And I'll be sure to send out in the email who to contact at the state for more information about Moose Plates. But these funds can be used year after year. You can apply even if you've gotten money in the past. LCHIP likes to see phased projects, and so you can go back for money, but you have to have finished the previous project before you go back and ask for more money. All of that information is available on their websites. And the Moose Plates website is mooseplates.gov or .org? I can't remember.
Should be gov.
Yeah, I'll make sure to send that out as well. So let's talk about, let's see if there's something else. Historic preservation consultants can be really helpful in doing your state register or national register nomination, as well as part of the team that works on the conditions assessment. If you have a lot of your building history already, they can help find that information, the gaps in the information, and refine that so that it's a concise history and statement of significance for the state register. You don't want to have to tell them a 5-page story in these documents. You want it to be a concise statement and advocacy for the listing of the building, not trying to tell the entire history of it. You save that for when you're trying to find people to help pay for the project that you're working on. Can we talk a little bit about getting some of that history? Maggie, do you have any?
Oh, I was going to talk about the private fundraising.
Okay.
Which is your priority?
Well, I know that one of the projects that's here is working on a crowdsourcing histories for their building. Are there good ways to try and get information from people when there isn't good history available for a building?
Maybe I can be some help here. I wrote the town history of Ackworth and also of Alstead. So this is how I got into it also. But you'd be surprised what's out there for history, depending a little bit on what kind of building you have. Certainly start with your town history. If there is one, go to your library or your local historical society and look for maps that show the building. Look for old deeds. By now, the counties, all the counties in New Hampshire have their real estate deeds online, and that can tell you something about the transition in ownership for the building that you may be working on. There are also state registers. So these were mostly, as far as I know, privately published, but they came in a whole variety of years, and they list businesses. So if you're working with a building that was once a store or a shop or a manufacturing place of some kind, these so-called registers of the state of New Hampshire, and maybe Maggie or Nicole knows better, but I think they're privately printed. They go by towns, and then in the town, they list all of the relevant businesses and usually the town officers, the number of schools, information like that. There's also a huge amount of information in the state archives on South Fruit Street in Concord, and you can go there during their open hours and look for information. You may have to start with your town and then dig down further to get to what kind of a building you're searching for. But there's a lot of information out there. Old maps, see if the library has old maps. There were statewide maps done in the 1850s and also 1892, the so-called herd map, the 1892 maps of all the towns in New Hampshire. And those give the owners, the locations of schoolhouses, all that sort of information as things stood in 1892. So a good chance that you'll find your building on there also. Just very, very briefly, those are some of the places I would look.
Yeah, I'll include in the follow-up email the link to our virtual gathering session on researching your historic building, as well as our webpage about that, which does have links to, I believe it's Plymouth State University's maps, or UNH, I can't remember which it is, but we just have 14 minutes left to this. So Maggie, if you want to talk a little bit about the fundraising, is that fundraising or communication that you wanted to talk about next? And then hopefully we can save the last.
If that's of interest to people, can you just nod or shake your head if you want me to talk a little bit about private fundraising? Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yes. Terrific. This is a really important component of what you're trying to do. And many people will come into this and say, I hate fundraising. But if you've got a good project and you're passionate about it, you can do the fundraising. There are a couple of ways to go about it. If yours is a very grassroots project and you have no money to start with, you may have to do some very basic, simple fundraising around a community event, or if it's a church, you know, to pull your congregation. If it's, well, a school, you might, a historic school, you might just, you know, do some bake sales on the lawn or something. And that's fine, but that's not going to raise the amount of money that you're going to need to do your project. So as Helen said, some of these small grants, like the assessment grant, where you might have to raise $3,000, give you the leverage to then go out and ask people to match it. And when you get a grant, using that money to leverage other money doubles it. It's sort of an obvious thing, but you have to think strategically. Okay, we're going to raise money to match the assessment grant. Then we're going to raise money to match the LCHIP grant for the stabilization of the foundation. Then we're going to raise money to repair the siding. And as you build on these phases, you will demonstrate success to more and more people. And if you do your job well, you will be communicating that success and talking about the benefits to your community in a way that will bring more people on board. If there's someone who is particularly interested and can make a lead gift, that will make a huge difference to your process. And we all know who the people are, or we think we know. We have a pretty good handle on the people in the town who are likely to have the means to support projects like ours. If you don't know who they are, see who's supporting the Friends of the Library, see who's contributing to other fundraising campaigns in town. And usually you can find that information and talk to them one-on-one, just to see what they think of your project, listen to what they have to say, and incorporate those concerns into what you're doing. I had one other note about, databases. You have to keep track of your donors and you have to keep them up to date on what you're doing. So if that means a little newsletter that you can, through Constant Contact, where you have the list of all your contributors, do that. If this is where those people who have technological skills can be really helpful to you. Just someone who will do that tracking for you, who may not really have a passion for preservation but wants to help, is invaluable. Send them regular updates. Make sure they feel like they're included. They're the ones who have already made a gift and are most likely to make a second gift. So don't feel like you have to get $10,000 from the people who've got money. If you say, could you give us $1,000 because we need to raise 4,000 to match our assessment grant, that would be great. So start small, work incrementally, have those face-to-face meetings with people that you think might be interested. If they give you some good feedback, the visit will have been worthwhile. If they ask for more information, follow up and provide it. Adjust your case statement to address the concerns they might have expressed. Show them that you've done that. Go back to them and say, you know, we've done what you asked us. You were right. Would you support us now? So, you know, people don't give money the first time they're asked, but they will give if you continue to cultivate them and keep them informed. And they're interested in the project and they have capacity. But even the people who aren't big givers may give you those $25 or $50 gifts that will help spread the word and help you build the momentum you need.
We have time for one or two questions. So if you want to put a question into the chat, I'll wrap up some things real quick while I wait for you to put in a question, and then we'll address one or two of those. If you have a town newspaper or newsletter or a nosy neighbor board or a community Facebook page, share your progress on there as well, because sometimes people are not in town, but watch those things or get those newsletters or newspapers. And sometimes if they see that you are trying to fundraise for something, they may send you something unsolicited. We were working on a playground fundraising project for our elementary school years ago, and we had a $15,000 funding gap. And we put it out there on our newsletter and on our Facebook page that we were trying to come up with those last few things. And we were showing all of the ways that we were trying to find that money. And we ended up getting an anonymous donor who's out of Florida to give us $30,000. So it was a vote of confidence that we had gotten so far in the project, and we just had this little bit left to do. And they actually over donated for us. We were able to do some other plantings and some park benches and things like that that we hadn't anticipated because of their generosity. But we didn't even know to ask that person because they weren't someone who was local.
I will say that the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation, through their small grants program, is making capital grants too. So don't overlook that. And there are a few other funding sources that traditionally support historic preservation. The Preservation Alliance now is partnering with the 1772 Foundation, for instance, to give those grants. But it's like a ladder. You really have to start at the bottom with the smallest ones and with very finite small goals, and then build and build and build. And you might not think you'll ever get to the top, but it's amazing how many people succeed just with hard work, perseverance, and taking the steps to do it.
I would put in a word also for businesses in your town. And we got money from the Mascoma Bank. We got money from the New Hampshire Electric Cooperative. There are organizations or larger companies that do that sort of thing. So go to their website and look for the part that says community. And that's where they explain how they support their local community by giving. There are also a number of these larger organizations that if you have to clean up a site, scrape some paint, clear some brush, pick up some litter, there are some organizations who give their employees a couple of days off per year to go and work on community projects like that. Eversource does that, and I think the Bank of New Hampshire does. So again,
United Way does too. Yeah.
Who does, Maggie?
United Way.
United Way. So go to the website of some of these organizations and see what they put under community and find out if they would be willing to help you. They often really like projects that are right in town. It's good publicity for them, and it certainly can help you out. People can also be pretty good about in-kind donations. We've gotten help from sawmills and from a company that does excavation and site work, for example. We've had some really good luck with things like those, and they can save you money. So don't hesitate to ask your local businesses for help.
And LCHIP has a provision for in-kind help that can be part of your 50% match. So don't overlook that either.
Yeah, we do have a question in the chat. When working on a town building and doing fundraising, do you find that we need to have a separate committee to do fundraising through a nonprofit? Maggie, do you have an answer for that?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
I think they're wondering if the town can raise funds through donations.
Typically, a town will not get involved in that, but gifts to a town's heritage commission are tax deductible. So that may be the way to go if your town has a heritage commission. And they're a great way to just keep the money a little bit separate. And then the commission is the organization, the nonprofit equivalent, to be managing the project on behalf of the town.
Yeah. If your town doesn't have a historic commission or a heritage commission, check and see if the historical society would be willing to help out. You would need to set up a separate banking account to keep that money separate for that project.
The other idea would be your regional economic development commission. I've seen them step in sometimes to be the fiscal agent for a project that has some economic benefit to the region.
That's great. So the questions don't need to end here. I will be sending out that follow-up email, and you can respond to it with any specific questions that we did not address here or ones that you think of after the fact. But I want to thank all of the attendees for joining us this afternoon, and thank you to our very expert panelists, Maggie Steer and Helen Frink. We had hoped to have a couple more people, but with the weather and COVID numbers the way they are, some people were not available today. We'll send out that follow-up email with links to helpful resources and the things that we mentioned here today, DHR's 5-year plan, as well as the links for researching your historic building. And also links to our previous programs on fundraising and communications. They can be really helpful. We hold them a couple times a year, so look forward to our upcoming events as well. Any last words, Maggie or Helen?
I'm just looking at the chat and how interesting it is that not everybody's from New Hampshire. I hope we've been helpful here. Again, a call to the Preservation Alliance, or if you're out of state, to your statewide nonprofit preservation group, will yield the kind of more personalized help where you can tell your story and ask specific questions that will be what you need to get moving.
So please help keep New Hampshire Preservation Alliance healthy by making a donation or renewing your membership. 80% of our funding comes from individual donors. Our work, the Preservation Alliance, and yours is more important than ever in strengthening community connections and supporting preservation projects throughout the state and the region. Thank you for coming today, and I hope you have a wonderful afternoon.